going to record today's session so that we can circulate after the recording so you can listen back if you do have to dip out, or for those of you that weren't able to join, you can listen again. Can we have the next slide, please? So you will see today it is a webinar session. So you can see the panelists, so you can see me and some of my team, but you can't see each other. We are hosting a question and answer session at the end, but what we're trying to do today is to feed back to you what we've learned for the first 12 months of the pilot. So there may not be as many questions that you'll have today. So it may be a short Q&A session at the end, but if you do want to submit a question, the Q&A function, the little button is on the slide and it should appear on the bottom of your screen. If you do want to click it and add a question, you can do so. Again, if you're experiencing any technical issues with the webinar functions, if you do put a note in the chat and one of the team will reach out and help you. Today's session is based on a report that my team have been busily compiling that puts together all the learning from the pilot over the past 12 months. And what we've done is sent out that report. So we're trying to give you a flavour of what's in the report today. But if you do have a question after reading the report, or even if you think about one after attending or listening to today's webinar, please do email us. But Sam will be telling you a little bit more about this later on in the presentation. We are going to have some virtual discussion groups that's coming up, and they will really be an opportunity for you to discuss some of the findings that we're telling you about, and to express your opinion about whether the findings have applied to you or whether you've found it a slightly different situation with your experience in the pilot. So there will be an opportunity for you to discuss the findings in more detail. So we can have the next slide, please. So what we've tried to do today is have some polls in the webinar. So you will be familiar with these because we sometimes ask at the webinar how you felt the poll was it good? But just to try and introduce some interactivity in today's session, we're trying out the polls. And there'll be certain points where we'll share the findings with you and then ask you to have a think about those findings and how they apply to you. So we'll give you around 30 seconds to answer it. We'll give you a warning that we're going to launch the poll and hopefully you should be able to see it. Don't worry if you don't see it and you don't have the opportunity to complete it. They're just an opportunity for you to engage with us in the webinar. And it'll help us take your views away and think about how we design future webinars if they are successful. So again, just a brief reminder, if you are watching the recording, again, you won't be able to participate in the poll. Can we have the next slide, please? So what's the purpose of today's session? Well, we are really excited to bring you this report today. So the team have been working hard on this report, bringing together all the evidence that we've had through the various learning activities, and it summarises what we've heard from you over the first year. But also we wanted to give you a flavour of what we're doing during the second year of the pilot and some of the learning activities that we'll be looking at in a bit more detail. So we're going to talk you through the report itself and how you can use it and how you can dip into it. And then we'll go into a bit more detail about the feedback, about what we've heard, and again, as alluded to, some of the discussion groups. We're going to touch on how we've used some of that feedback to develop where we are, how we've used it for the recent announcement that we had back in January. And then, as I said, we'll have a short Q&A session at the end. We have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to very quickly touch on how we're learning and the big areas. I know you will have heard this before, but I think this puts it in useful context when we go through the feedback in more detail. So we've got three broad themes of what we're learning in the pilot. The first is value for money. Will the scheme deliver the benefits we expect? So this is in terms of environmental benefits. So, the benefits that we're hoping to achieve by you delivering some of the actions, are we going to achieve those? And are we going to do it in a way that is value for money for the money that we're actually putting into the delivery of the standard and the cost to administer the scheme? The second big bucket is operational delivery, and it's about the experiences of the systems and processes that we've used in the pilot. So just to provide you with an example, so we've introduced the annual declaration process to replace the claim form that some of you may be familiar with if you were in countryside stewardship. So we were interested to hear how that's gone, how's it worked, how it could be improved. The final big bucket is around scheme design, and it's all around, does the design of the standards and the design of the scheme work for you, and does it deliver the environmental benefits that we're expecting it to deliver? And we know we've gathered lots of learning on that, looking at the standards, how they can be delivered, and helped to structure the standards for the offer that we've got currently in Sustainable Farm Incentive, but that we're going to open up later this year. If we can have the next slide, please. So I know you've seen this slide before, but I think it's just a useful reminder of how we use the learning from you in the pilot. So we'll take you through some examples today, but what we do is we identify learning priorities. What is it that we want to learn? So we've got the three big buckets, but underneath that, there's some learning priorities. So for example, we may want to learn how the annual declaration has worked. Then what we'll do is we'll generate some information through learning activities. So we might invite you along to a workshop, or you may have an interview with one of my team or with one of our research organisations that's helping us. And that generates data about what's working, what's not quite working. We then bring that learning together, both to look at it, bringing in together lots of different sources. So we'll have had workshops, we'll have had interviews, and we'll bring that together to analyse it and understand, well, what does this tell us about the annual declaration process? How's it working? What's the common themes? Where has it not worked for some? And then we'll share that with the policy team. So that's where our feedback loop comes into policy teams to say, we've completed our learning on the annual declaration process. This is what we've learned. And they may ask us further questions that will lead to further research. But what it will also lead to in terms of our learning process is then applying that learning. So in terms of the annual declaration, how's that gone? Has it worked well? How do we improve that going forward, and applying that learning in when we roll out our new schemes in Sustainable Farm Incentive, but also in Countryside Stewardship. And then we assess the impact of the pilot right at the end to understand, well, we've gathered all this learning, what difference has it meant for you generating the learning on our behalf? So if we go to the next slide, please. So I know some of you have taken part in lots of learning activities, and the slide just gives you an indication of some of the things that we've done. So we've had various webinars, online discussions, lots of interviews, but we've also had some on-farm events and some face-to-face local events that you came along to. So there's been lots of different ways in which we've gathered the learning and generated that learning during 2022. And I just wanted to thank you for those of you that have participated in that learning and helped us to identify what's working and what's working well and what's not working. This slide just says that the learning from the pilot is really important and it helps us inform where we're going, but it's not the only source of evidence that policy teams use to form their policy. And this slide just gives you an indication of the range of different evidence that they bring together when they're forming and developing policy. So it may be, for example, research that external organisations have done. We've also got in-house research that we've done through tests and trials or through our co-design panels, but we also look at industry and industry bodies and industry research and what they've been doing. And to some of the other practitioner working groups and feasibility workshops that we've been having. So we bring together a vast range of evidence as well as the evidence through the pilot to develop to make decisions about how our schemes and our policies work. And before I hand over to Sam to take you in, Sam and Charlie to take you through a bit more detail of the feedback, I just wanted to give you what indication of our priorities for the second year of the pilot. So you may have been involved in some of these already, but we're really interested to look at how monitoring compliance has worked. So right the way through from the site visits to you getting your site visit reports, if you've been invited for a desk-based check, how that's worked, what's working and how it can improve. The annual change period or the amendment process, again, that 12-month anniversary where you can add things in or take things out of your agreement, again, how that's worked for you, what's worked and what's worked well. The annual declaration, keen to hear, obviously a number of you have been through that process, so we'll be doing some concentrated work over the next couple of months looking at that annual declaration and what's worked about that. We're about to roll out some work over the coming weeks looking at what it cost for you to implement the standards in your agreement. And we're really interested to hear your thoughts on this and about the costs of delivery to help us inform how we cost out and fund the standards. We're also going to be doing some work on stacking not only the standards, so how you've stacked the standards, what standards have worked really well to stack, but also stacking schemes. And we're going to do some work in terms of what it's easy to stack, but also what it might be tricky to stack, and so how we might overcome some of those barriers that you've identified when you've been stacking the standards on the land that you've got in the pilot. And then finally, how you've used your land management plan. So again, some further work that we'll be doing probably later this year, but looking at land management plans and how you've used them to track and monitor what you deliver in the pilot. So have the next slide, please. So before I hand over, I just wanted to quickly take you through the structure of the report. So why have we got this report? Well, it's something that we know a number of you were really keen to understand and bring it all together in one place, what we've learned during the first year of the pilot. This is so that we can let you know what we've been doing, but so we can build on that learning in the second year of the pilot. So how can you use the report? So we have read and taken on board your feedback, and this report provides a summary. So please don't think it'll contain every line that we've heard. It is very much a summary of what you've heard. So you might agree with some areas, but you perhaps may not agree with others. Reading the report is completely voluntary, so if you want to, you can read through it from cover to cover, but if you just want to dip into parts of it, that's completely up to you. What we've done is we've asked pilot farmers to do some videos that accompany the report, which are really accessible and give you an indication of how some of the farmers have gone. So please do take the time to have a look at those videos because I think it's a neat little summary of what the report says. What the report is a snapshot of our learning. So it gathers our learning at year one, at a point in time in the pilot, but we know that we're doing more learning and we're going to build that up over time. So the feedback will change over time, but this is just a position where we're at the moment. And just a reminder that it can take time for feedback to lead to changes, and sometimes those changes don't take place in the pilot, but are in the wider scheme. And we will touch on that a bit later in the presentation, just to give you an indication of where some of your feedback has led to changes when we've rolled out the main scheme. But we take that feedback to make the right decisions at the right time based on all the evidence sources. So we just wanted to say how important your feedback has been to help us design and deliver and roll out the environmental land management schemes. We have the next slide, please. So just in terms of the report itself, so I don't want to go through it in detail, but what does it provide you with? So the first section just gives you an update on the pilot, the land that it has in there, the number of agreements and where they're at. The second section of the report just tells you how we've learned during the first year, the learning processes and some of the activities that we've run so far. The next section then summarises the feedback we've heard during these activities for the different themes, the different broad themes that we've got in the pilot. And then finally, the report explains where the feedback sits in the learning process and gives some examples of how that feedback has resulted in change to our schemes. So I hope that gives you just a bit of a flavour of how the report is structured and how you may wish to dip into that report based on your interests. So the remainder of this presentation, we're very much going to use it to run through some of the feedback, because I know you're really interested to hear about what that feedback is. So it's split into two. So the operational and value for money feedback and the scheme design feedback. So Charlie and Sam are going to run through these areas in a bit more detail with you, and I'll hand over to them in a moment. So if we have the next slide, please. And at that point, I think I'll introduce Charlie, who's going to take us through the operational feedback. Charlie.
Thanks, Louise. So hi, everyone. I'm Charlie. I'm part of the learning team, and I'm going to take you through some of the findings about the operational processes in the pilot so far. So first, we've got the application and agreement stage. When we asked you about the application and the process, you told us that you managed to apply yourself, but the online guidance can be a little confusing. With agreements, the process was straightforward, but some of the language could be simplified. Some found it took longer than others to resolve a problem with the agreement. Next slide, please, Jamie. So with the capital items and site visits. With capital items, you said the application itself was easy to understand, but the mapping requirements can take up some time. The initial payment rates you told us were insufficient, and only being able to apply once has caused a bit of difficulty because you don't know when it's best to apply. So site visits. Site visits to monitor your agreement have been taking place, and we spoke to some of you about your experience of these. You said that the site visits so far have been positive, and participants said field officers were fair and supportive. But you said the follow-up process after the visits hasn't been clear, and it's taken a while for some of you to receive your final report. So we have the first poll. The first poll is about the monitoring process and the feedback we've had so far. So it should have popped up for you now. So hopefully you can see that and you can answer if you like. How are we doing on the poll, Liz?
Yeah, good. Over half have participated, with around 65% answering yes at the moment. Just 5 more seconds and then I'll close the poll for this one and share the results.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so Liz has closed the poll now, and you should have a pop-up which shows you the results there. So that's quite mixed. That's really interesting for us, and it's definitely things we want to build on whilst we do some more learning about the monitoring process. So we'll get on to the next slide. Thank you. So advice. We've asked about advice about advice you've paid for across a number of activities, and you've told us that mostly at the beginning you got advice to make sure you were doing the right thing for your business. People who haven't paid for advice don't feel like they would need to in the future, and the main thing that we could do to help would be to improve the online guidance. So land management planning. We gave you 3 templates that were developed by participants in the tests and trials to test further. You liked that you could set out what you're doing on your land and where. You also said that maps were useful, but some of the digital maps were hard to use and internet access in a field was an issue. So next slide, please, Jamie. Okay, right, that's the end of the operational learning so far. We've got a video now from a participant, Robin Milton, and then I will pass over to Sam. You can press play. Thank you.
I don't think I can hear it. And anyone else here?
No, I can't.
Bear with, I'm just going to stop sharing and reshare 1 minute.
Thanks, Jamie. Videos are new to our presentations as well, so bear with us.
Is that working?
Morning from a very wet and windy Exmoor. My name is Robin Milton. I'm an Exmoor farmer. I'm in the SFI pilot, only on 3 standards, because we felt that was what suited and fitted to start with, to give it a trial run. And just to start with, we looked at it and decided to try the pilot because we felt there were items that would, 1, benefit our business, and 2, we could work within what we have here. I found the application process to be reasonably straightforward. It wasn't as intuitive as it might have been. Quite a lot of flicking from one screen to another. The hardest part there was to keep flicking to the guidance, and rather lengthy guidance notes. It would be quite nice if they were a little more succinct, and maybe in more bullet point form rather than such an explanatory form where you have to search for things to do. Other than that, though, the application process not too bad, but pulled together and produced something that we thought was fine. The guidance was okay, better in some areas than others. The initial guidance around the SFI soil standards, especially as we got into we did the advanced one, I found that to be quite complex to understand and wasn't really that easy to determine exactly what was needed. Don't forget, as farmers, we're quite used with any of these schemes to be told what to do. Even my agronomist struggled. And I think what the net result was actually probably to the benefit of both of us, in that he learned an awful lot, I learned quite a bit, and actually I think we probably ended up doing significantly more than we needed to. Is that a bad thing? Probably not. I have seen some of the new application process. I think it's definitely improved, and it's definitely much more intuitive than the pilot approach. I think it should probably manage to lead people through them quite straightforward.
Right, thanks everyone. I think it's across to me now to give you an update on the scheme design feedback. So afternoon to everyone. My name's Sam Dovian, and for those of you that haven't met me before, I work in the pilot team with Louise and Charlie. So I've got a few polls to go through with you. Our sort of first area of feedback is around the implementation of standards, and so in terms of our entry surveys and the initial work we did about standards and those taking on agreements and starting to do things, we did find that the feedback that we got that most participants were in general successfully implementing their standards, and in the vast majority of cases have only had to make small changes to their sort of existing farming practices or their farm management to actually incorporate the standards or delivery of the standards or doing the actions within the standards to their farm business to make that happen. So the second poll that we wanted to run with you is about the sort of the confidence in terms of implementation. So when we know that this was a new scheme and the pilot was sort of the very first part of the new scheme that we've been sort of working on and rolling out. And so what we wanted to do today was to find out from all of you that are present that if you have sort of got more confidence now in implementing the standards than perhaps when you first started your agreement. So was there some hesitation or concern when we were sort of putting these agreements together in the start, as compared to now when some of you are sort of over a year through, some of you are coming up towards your year's anniversary. And you know, are you a bit more comfortable with doing that as part of your general day farm to farm practices? So Liz, if you're able to launch the poll, perhaps we'll run this now. And if everybody who wants to take part, if you could just give us an idea of how you're feeling in terms of implementation, that would be great. And if you're not sure, there is an option for that as well.
We've had around 84% reply. Thank you very much. So
Excellent.
I'll end the poll there and share it for you.
Brilliant. So thanks to everybody that's taken part in that, and some interesting answers, but quite good, you know, and comforting to know that the majority of you are you know, feeling more confident now than when you started. And I know that when we talked to lots of you in the autumn face-to-face events last year, that, you know, there was some concern about how it was going to work out on the farm, and how you were going to incorporate those into your sort of day-to-day activities. So it's good to know that everybody's feeling more confident. So the other part of the feedback that we've been putting together is also about the concerns about implementing standards correctly to make sure that they sort of meet the scheme requirements. And the main points that have come up most frequently in terms about concerns were over sort of dry weather, so the drought conditions that we experienced last year, the time and cost that it takes to implement these and to make sure that you're delivering correctly, the sorts of evidence that you need to keep, so the paperwork, the details in our land management plans that we're running with you, and the learning journal, and the sort of general evidence to show that you've actually delivered some of the actions within the standards. Another concern was the RPA and the monitoring. So obviously we know that we've got a regime running from our previous common agricultural policy schemes, and our aim, you know, one of our key principles with our new schemes is to try and have a slightly different approach to monitoring and sort of compliance side. But we know that that's a concern that lots of you have had in terms of how's that going to work, what does it mean, how different it is. And also concerns over the timing of agreements going live, because our sort of agreement window started in November 2021, and we were setting agreements live right up until June last year. So I think the timing of that therefore then made sort of some difficulties or concerns over where you were going, what your cropping plans were doing, or management practices that you'd put in place for the coming year. So those were our sort of the concerns that were raised, and what we wanted to do is sort of just check that back with you today. So we've got another poll to find out, you know, if that sort of, if those concerns are the ones that sort of come into your mind as well in terms of being implemented. So I've just put another poll up on the screen, and if you can select, you know, the one that you think, if you did have a concern, the one that was the most concerning for you. So if we open that, and we'll give you a bit of time to run that through.
Just at around 80% again. So I'll share the results here. And just to say, with the other, unfortunately, we couldn't put in any free text. But if you'd like to tell us what your concern was, to pop us an email or pop it in the chat, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks to everybody again that's taken part in poll 2. And I think it's quite clear there that the evidence keeping requirements, you know, is the one that has that most people have been concerned about. So that's an interesting result. And we know that the weather conditions were another factor this year, and it'll be interesting to know whether they whether that becomes a factor, you know, depending upon the weather that we experience as we come into the spring and summer this year. Okay, so if we could move on and go on to the next slide, please. The next part of the evidence that we were and feedback that we've been looking at is the payment side, and it may well come as no surprise to all of you that you know, quite a lot of the feedback that we had around payment was that it was insufficient. For what we were asking to do, in some cases unfair in terms of you know, what we were paying, in terms of maybe you know, taking areas out of production to help you know, deliver the environmental side, or in the longer term to you know, to support food production. But that was you know, that was a concern that was raised by a number of you through the different workshops and learning activities we've been doing. It was also certainly in the you know, over the last 12 months, certainly exacerbated by you know, the acute rise in input costs, and you know, although the input costs and operational costs were increasing, some of the yield prices were also increasing as well, which then does put, we know that puts pressure on farmers to decide, you know, how they manage their farm and how much land to put into food production, or how to consider these schemes and how to integrate them. So that was certainly feedback that we got from lots of you when we talked to you around the country, you know, from a payment perspective and how the schemes stack up against that. We also got quite a bit of feedback about hidden costs. So where some of you felt that you needed to hire professionals in particular for you know, which then sort of add on to, so on the face of it, it wouldn't seem to be a cost, but once you actually get into the delivery of the standard, then that's something that you'd had to encounter and build into the work. So it was like a hidden cost. And we also had, for example, with the hedgerow standard, we had, you know, feedback about increased costs, contractor costs for having to, you know, cut at wider periods than you had done in the past. But on a positive note, the quarterly basis of payments seemed to resonate quite well with everybody, and they felt that was a positive step forward and a positive change to you know, this scheme than those that we've seen in the in previous schemes before. So if we move on to the next slide, which I think is guidance and templates and examples. So so just some high level detail, some feedback, some of the key points that we had on these areas. You know, that I think most people were quite happy that the guidance that we had on .gov is comprehensive and detailed. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but we had quite a bit of feedback about how sort of the layout and how you navigate through different pages, and then trying to get back to where you started, and you know, that was quite a difficulty, particularly in the early stages where people were sort of setting themselves up, working out what they had to do, when they had to do it, and the sorts of things that were permissible. And again, no surprise, but we had lots of feedback about requesting a printable handbook version, and as I'm sure some of you have seen, for the full scheme, that is an area that they've been working on, and you can now print for the full scheme a handbook version as well. So we've also had, you know, quite a lot of feedback about how making the environmental aims of the actions clearer within the guidance, because that would help, you know, because that would help the delivery. So if we were a bit clear in terms of what we were trying to achieve through asking you to do these different actions within the standards, that you felt that would help you deliver those actions, because you would have more of an idea of why we were asking you to do something, instead of just saying, we're asking you to do it, please do it, to give you a bit more context to that. And lots of participants did say about if we could make guidance more visual, so examples about what good or successful implementation would look like, that would help them to translate that back to their farm situations, and would be a much sort of a much more user-friendly way of trying to guide yourself through a scheme on your own without others assisting. And I think another one, although what we have been trying to do with the scheme quite a lot is to leave it open to you. So lots of things like the soil management reports, or the nutrient budgets, we've been sort of saying it's up to you how you do this or what you need to do, but lots of participants have told us that they would prefer sort of standardized templates, particularly where there's evidence requirements, you know, specific to that, so that you could feel confident that you're doing them correctly, and you know, that you've got, you know, at least the minimum amount of what of information that we are likely to ask, or maybe you might be asked to show at a site visit. So although we don't want we don't want to be too prescriptive, and we're quite aware that the requirements from farm to farm can vary, there was definitely sort of a call to have some standardized templates that people could use if they wanted to, or use as a base to work up from, just to make sure, again, sort of give that reassurance that you've got the evidence, the sufficient evidence that you need to make sure that you can say, yes, I've delivered the actions in the standard, and I can sign my annual declaration and have that sort of confidence there. So that was a key point that we took back in terms of guidance and templates and how we use those. So if we go on to the next slide, please. I think we've got something on buffers and margins. So these are sort of, we haven't sort of dived down into the individual standards, and I'll cover those in a second, but sort of on a more sort of broad basis, when we've got things that apply across lots of different standards, buffers and margins came up quite frequently in terms of feedback that we had from you all, and there was quite a lot of unsureness or slight confusion about the management rules around buffer strips and margins, and this would probably lead us to suggest that maybe our guidance needs to be clearer. So in terms of management about cutting requirements, or if we're asking for a sort of a grass margin, that does mean a grass margin as opposed to a margin that's sort of left and allowed to scrub up. So I think there's definitely some work for us to feed back into policy teams as to when they're building this guidance, to make it really, really clear, because your experiences have shown us where it can be interpreted in different ways, or taken to mean different things. So we've been feeding that back in terms of making sure that that helps for the full scheme. In terms of the actual buffers and margin themselves, we've had quite a number of requests about how we can stack those across standards. So, if you've got a margin that you're using for the hedgerow, can that be used for the water body buffer, or how can it be used for the water body buffer? And the same for those of you who have got the land standards. So, we had quite a bit of feedback, and I know that the policy teams, had taken that on board, and were doing a lot of work about how they can build the standards and build the actions within the standards and allow you to stack those buffers. The other bit of feedback that we had was that it is important, I think, to recognise that that lots of you understand the benefits that we have for wildlife and biodiversity, and also how that can come across to the public as well. But we also have to balance that and understand the costs that if you do take land out of production to achieve these, which can also obviously have benefits to your sort of general farming practice as well, but that there is a cost to that. Plus, if you're sort of sowing your wildflower strips and that there are the seed costs, which come back to some of these hidden costs, which that have come out, and we've been learning from that, in terms of where they come and how you're sort of treating those and approaching that. And I think, again, no surprises here, but this is something that we're hearing loud and clear. So we wanted to make sure that we documented this and played it back to you, but particularly for smaller farms, or it could be larger farms, but where you have sort of patchwork of smaller fields, when when you're sort of doing buffers and margins around areas, this can often be a barrier, to certainly increasing in levels of ambition within the standards, because obviously the more the more area around field boundaries, the more the buffer strips apply. So you're taking more land out of production for those, and that was definitely seen as that was definitely seen as a barrier. So that's a bit about buffer strips and margins, and then I've got another slide about sort of flexibility versus prescription. So I think that the general consensus is that that you all like the more flexible approach that we've had in the pilot over other schemes and other schemes that can be quite prescriptive, and that's whether that's sort of within the individual actions within the standards themselves, or the scheme itself, where we've tried to be more flexible, and we've tried to with the annual declarations and a change period, so that you're signing up for a shorter period, and that that even within a within the first year you would have an opportunity to change it if you decided it didn't work. So there's a general appreciation of that. But as I said in the one of the previous slides, that the actual standards themselves, there are some areas where some flexibility would be useful. So perhaps some more choice or either or options for people within the standards, and also the guidance that we give to make that clear, where there's flexibility and what you can and can't do. But I think, again, all of this is balanced with the fact that you need to feel confident, and that when you interpret the standards or the actions within the standards or the guidance that we give you in a particular way, and that may be perhaps not such a mainstream way, or different to how your neighbouring farmer has done it, that you want to feel confident that the RPA are going to sort of accept that interpretation or that flexibility as well. So we definitely heard that, and that was definitely a concern. And as much as lots of you have been able to integrate these standards into your farming practices, there's no doubt, upon speaking to some of you and hearing the feedback from some of you, that it is quite, for some, and doing particular things, is quite a different way of managing a land. And so what we need to do in this is, and particularly as people become more with the wider schemes, as more people sign up, is we need to make sure that we strike that balance between being flexible and leaving it open to you all, but also being really, really clear about what's mandatory and what's not, so that, again, you can have that reassurance that when you do decide to interpret something, that you can feel confident that you've got that you've got that ability to do that, and to interpret it in the way that works for you, for your farm, for your land, or your farm business, or the way you want to run things. So that sort of leads me on to the next poll that we wanted to run with you, and we wanted to just find out, so obviously this is what we've been taking from the feedback that we've had, but in terms of general your experiences in the pilot so far, do you find it more flexible and less prescriptive than previous schemes, or do you think it's perhaps no different to other schemes that you've been in before? So if we could open that poll, please, Liz, and then we'll run it for a while so that you can all make your choices on there.
Yep, the poll is up and we have participants clicking their answer. Thank you very much. Just another few seconds. Okay, thank you very much. I'll share that results with the majority saying yes.
Yep, thanks, Liz. So yeah, so that's again a real positive result that backs up, what a lot of you have been telling us over the last year, that we've got a good percentage of you think that it's definitely more flexible. So really interesting that 12% of you think that it's not any more flexible. And some not sures as well, in terms of, so maybe not deciding yet, having made a decision whether this is actually any better than the previous scheme. So, but that's really useful and helpful for us. So thank you very much. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about environmental impacts, because obviously we're asking you to deliver all these different standards, or the actions within these standards. We've heard about how we could make it a bit clearer in terms of the environmental impacts, or the reasons that we're asking you to do this. And what we do need to do, and one of the key sort of areas of the pilot is to understand the extent to which the different standards that we have and the actions within those standards will lead to environmental impacts. So whether they do enhance the biodiversity, whether they support crop predation, crop pest predation, whether they do the actions about improving your soil health, and understanding more about your soil, how that works. So over the last year, we have been running an environmental baseline data project with a couple of partners, and we've been out to a number of you. So I'm sure a number of you on the call today will have may well have been visited by those undertaking that, and we're going to be doing a 3-year impact evaluation on the pilot to see how this has worked and which standards or which actions within standards have had the most success, and which perhaps need more tweaking to make it to improve, so that we can understand where that and in what sort of farm type, or is it dependent upon the farm type or the location. So we're running that, and we'll continue to run that and build on that this year and next year as well, and we will be sharing those results with you as we once they're available, and once they're sort of in a format that will be helpful for you to all to see. We will be sharing those. So that's about our environmental impact. And then I've just got another slide, but just to mention the actual standards themselves. So obviously we appreciate that we're sort of giving you quite a lot of information today in a webinar format, where we are sort of downloading to you what we've heard and how we've heard it, and the key things. So what we haven't done is gone into sort of detail about the 8 different standards, and the specific feedback that we've had from you about the standards or the individual actions within those standards. What we have done in the report itself, there is quite a detailed analysis of the feedback that we've had. So if you're interested in any of these particular areas, in particular, if you really want to go and have a look at the feedback that we've had on the water body buffering to see if it resonates with what your experiences have been, or if you know that you've given us some specific feedback and want to see if that's captured, there's more detail within the report on those, but we didn't want to sort of hold you for a lot longer to go through lots of these in detail in the webinar today. And I'm going to play you, we've got another video of one of our pilot farmers who's sort of giving some face-to-face feedback. So we're going to play that shortly. And just to also mention that as part of this first year report, a number of you have been really helpful and have put together some feedback videos to explain your thoughts, your experiences on different aspects of the scheme. And we've put those together in a library, which we're using for sort of our internal policy development work with our internal policy teams, but also available for you as pilot participants as well on your SharePoint site, so that you can go in and have a look at what other farmers in the pilot have been saying, and you can see some of their sort of locations and their situations. So if you're interested in that, do go and look at those, and we're going to be building some more. So we want to keep expanding the library as certainly into the second year of the pilot. And so if any of you are interested in taking part or producing a video for us, then do get in touch. And also just a thank you to everybody that has done it so far this year as well. So we'll move on and we'll play the next one, which is Harry Baker Cresswell, and he is talking about the hedgerow standard.
This is a landscape scale view of oilseed rape in the Big U Hill at Rock Farms Limited, part of the SFI pilot. Videoing here illustrates hedgerow standard, whereby only 50% of the hedges at Rock Farms Limited are trimmed each winter. This is targeted for fields destined for oilseed rape, so that there's no need to travel over growing oilseed rape, but also there was an extremely valuable aspect to wintering farmland birds. The shrub layer at the base of the hedge, as well as the hawthorns itself, offer useful habitat for birds such as tree sparrows, which nest in the rather decaying old ash in the background. In the far background is new woodland planted like 22 years ago, Arkle's wood, and this is buffered by pollen and nectar strips closer to. The management of the hedgerow standard is straightforward, but advice and guidance is used by Carl Tuer, the manager at Rock Farms Limited. That their advice does not have to be overly technical, but advice it is nonetheless. Terry Grahamslaw does the hedge trimming here, and Terry keeps a map of where hedges are to be trimmed. That map is derived directly from the land management plan put in place by Carl Tuer and his environmental advisor to decide where the best hedges are, where we should best look after those hedges, and where particular levels of farmland bird interest are. The field I'm standing in now to take this video is open and most appealing to English partridges, skylark, tree sparrow, and indeed reed bunting further away near a watercourse. So these are all birds that benefit from hedges being trimmed less often. So advice and guidance feeds into the land management plan, and that in turn feeds into the selection of hedges to be left untrimmed on a 2-year rotation.
Right, thank you to Harry for providing that video for us. And so, as I mentioned, we've got, I think, about a dozen different videos from different farmers across the country that we've been putting together. So just some examples of the starts of the videos there. But so if you're interested in hearing what other people have been up to and what other people have been saying about their experiences in the pilot so far, do go and have a look. And as I say, we're looking to grow that library over the year so that we can cover sort of as many different aspects of the pilot and as many different from as many of you as possible, different farms, different locations, to have a really comprehensive record and view of how how your experiences have been going in the pilot. As I mentioned, if we move on to the next slide, please. As I mentioned just now, we haven't gone into a massive amount of detail about the individual standards because, and certainly with me, we could end up being here all day and all night if we did go into those. But what we would like to do for any of you that are interested is to put together some sort of virtual discussion groups. So we'll probably run them by Zoom or through Teams on a smaller basis, and just to go through some of the feedback that we have had in a bit more detail. Talk to you about that. Does that resonate with what you think? Are there certain areas that we could drill down into or understand a bit more, so that we can feed that back into our policy teams? So we were looking at different areas that we could talk to you, sort of combining different areas, and we've put together these different topics that we could run these groups on. So we're just going to run another poll. You can see the poll sign here on the slide, as just to see if you would be interested in coming to a group. So we'll run an initial poll on, would you like to sign up for a group if we offered these in the coming weeks, and then we'll run a second poll in terms of, if you did want to come, which sort of areas you'd be interested in attending, just to give us an idea of the sort of what people think would be most interested and how many people would like to come to them. So if we run this first one then, Liz, and then we'll run the second one.
Yep, the poll is up, and we have around 80% that have selected their answer, and it seems like people are keen to come to these discussion groups, but I'll leave it just open another 5 seconds.
Okay, so that's good. So thanks everybody that's taken part in that. So there's definitely a positive view to attending some of these groups and having a discussion a bit further about the different areas of feedback that we've had. So if we run our second poll now, and that's really just looking at, out of these areas, which do you think, if you select, you may want to come to more than one of them, and you may well be able to come to more one of them if we put them on. But what we'd like to know is just sort of, which would be the most popular groups that we could run, just to give us an idea, so we can start planning those and put some sessions together for you. How are we getting on, Liz, on that one?
Yep, just about there, I think, with the majority of people, and the standards are quite popular. So I'll share those results now.
Okay, yep, no, that's really helpful. So yeah, definitely can see that there's some some preference over the standards. So I think what we'll do is we'll do some work in the team and put some sessions together for you. So look out in terms of our communications through our newsletter and also our sort of individual indications for those that will come up soon. And we'll look to put some on for you so that we can dive into this in a little bit more detail and share a bit more of the information that's contained within the report and have some smaller one-to-one discussions. So I'm just going to move on. You'll be pleased to know that this will be sort of almost my last slide, but we just really wanted to cover back. So obviously I've mentioned in the I've mentioned sort of throughout the presentation that a lot of this feedback that we're taking, we're taking the feedback, we're looking at it, we're analysing it, we're validating it with I know lots of you have been attending smaller workshops, and then we've been validating some of that with larger groups, and we've obviously got our sort of larger surveys that go out to lots of you, and in some cases all of you. So we take all that information and we've been putting it together, and then we've been feeding that back into our policy teams. We've been feeding it back into the RPA, particularly around the operational side. So the information that you've that you've given us. So we're quite, it's quite comforting that we know that a lot of the feedback that you've come to us, a lot of the some of the pain that you've been through as the pilot participants, certainly in the application process, looking at some of the different terms and conditions that we've got and the way the agreements are set up. That's all gone into the scheme, and we've been able to influence how they've rolled out the scheme and developed it through the monitoring and site visits, things like SSIs and the heifer listings as well. They've all had a lot of input through the the feedback that we've had from you, things about the guidance, our videos, the wordings, the how-to guides that are features of the full scheme are all there. And then we've also been feeding back views about the payment rates, and certainly the way that the standards have been developed. As Louise said right at the start of the presentation, there are lots of sort of contributing areas of evidence that come in to our policy teams, and so they use lots of different different channels for that, but the pilot is one of those sort of consistent ones that's there, and because we're sort of running this scheme with you, it's one that does have a lot of features in a lot of the work that we do and how that gets back. So hopefully that's a reassurance that the work that you're doing and being part of the pilot still is very important, and it certainly is having influence and giving rise to change in the schemes as they're developed and rolled out to the wider farming population. So I think I've come to the end of the sort of presentation itself, and we've got I think I'm going to hand back to Louise in a minute, but we've got a chance for a short question and answer. I know lots of you have been putting questions and comments into the Q&A section. What we want to try and do, if we can, is limit some of these sort of questions to the feedback and the feedback report itself, because obviously that's what we're that's what we're here today to try and to get across to you. But Louise, if you're there, sorry, I'm not sure if I can see you or not.
Hi, Sam.
But perhaps we can go through some of the questions that we've got.
Hi, Sam. We can go through the questions. I must say it's great that a lot of the questions are comments and feedback that we will take back to us. Obviously, there's no questions in there, but having the feedback's great. A lot of them are individual queries about agreements. So we can cover some of the general topics here. I think we'll have about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll come to a close. And some of them are actually specifically for the videos, so I think we probably need to take them away because they're for the farmers themselves rather than for us to answer. Unfortunately, we don't have the farmers on the call, so we can't pick up if you have an individual query about your agreement, unfortunately, we can't pick that up. What I would say is please do email the RPA, and the team have been putting the links, the email address in the chat to RPA if you do have an agreement. I know a number of you have been in touch. If some of you have payment holds on and you're not sure why that is the case. And we have been assured that the Rural Payments Agency are in regular contact with everybody who's got a payment hold. So I can only apologise if that isn't happening, but please do get in touch, and they can take you through why your payment's been on hold. Equally, I can see that there are a number of you that haven't had a response from your site visit. I've had a site visit, it seems to have gone well, but you haven't had your final report. Again, this is a learning process. We're learning what works and what doesn't in the pilot, and it has taken us slightly longer to process some of those site visit reports than that we anticipated to work through some of those issues. So some people will be experiencing delays. If you haven't heard anything and your payment is on hold, again, please do get in touch with the Rural Payments Agency, and they can take you through that in more detail. I'll just scroll through and see if what we'll try and do first is take any questions on the feedback itself.
Louise, there's one about small one-to-one groups that was posted in there, and I think just while you're having a look, I can say that we know that sort of getting face-to-face with you is really, really helpful, so we are looking at how we can sort of get out and meet more of you on farm, or get some of you together in farm situations, as well as meeting you sort of perhaps in some more sort of wider events as we did last year. So we're definitely working on that, and we've already sort of started our initial round of farm visits. There's one going on in Preston in a couple of weeks' time, and I know lots of you up in that area have had notification of that. So we are looking to sort of come around the country, see more of you on farm, and get you together, as well as doing the sort of the more online work that we're doing with the workshops and the surveys as well. But we're just trying to get a balance so that we can get as many views in as we can, and get out to as many of you as we can. And obviously it's harder to do that on a face-to-face basis all the time.
Thanks, Sam. And I think what we're trying to say is that we did have the local events last year where we had 6, but we recognise there are pockets, geographical areas that we haven't been to. So what we're trying to do is come to the areas that we perhaps haven't been to, so some of the on-farm events. So if you are interested in hosting an on-farm event, please do get in touch with us. Equally, please do get involved if you see one that's happening near you. As I said, we're actively working on a programme over summer of where we'll be visiting some of the farms in the pilot to just have a look, see how you've implemented the standards. We've got a question here from Sam. I think it's more a comment than a question, but I think some of you have been involved. We've got ADAS that's doing a piece of work looking at whether the actions that we've got in the standards deliver the environmental benefits that we're looking at. And I know some of you have had some of those visits with ADAS. Just to make it clear, it's not an inspection, it's just a visit, and it's for our own research purposes to understand if these actions that we've got are leading to the environmental benefits that we're wanting to deliver. And absolutely, we will use these studies that we are doing to hone what we deliver in the main scheme. So if we're doing something that's not delivering the intended benefits, obviously we'll feed that evidence into our policy teams, and they will look at why and how they can deliver the best results in the schemes that we're delivering. So yes, thank you for that question. That's a great question about the environmental benefits that we're delivering in the work that ADAS is doing. We've got a couple of questions and a little bit of frustration about the capital uplift. So as you may be aware, we did update the rates for capital from the beginning of January. So if you are applying for an agreement from January, you will get the uplift to the new rates. However, if you already have an agreement and you haven't started activity, please do get in touch with the RPA to find out how you can benefit for the new rates if you haven't started that activity. So hopefully that will help with some of the questions we've got around capital items. We did have another question about payment rates, and just to confirm, the payment rates for the standards in the pilot increased again from the beginning of January. So for those of you that were due your first year 2 quarterly payment in February, you should have received the uplift in payment rates, and those were uplifted in line with the countryside stewardship rates. Sam, can you see any other?
I was going to say that I noticed that Glenn, I think, has made a sort of a comment as opposed to a question about crop recording software to record actions, and you know, rather than sort of duplicating. And I think that's fine. And I think that does come back to where we're trying to sort of give flexibility over recording. So as long as you've got the evidence and you know, you feel that you've got that, and you could make it available if you had a site visit or a desk-based visit, or just generally wanted to be able to refer back to that, then there's no problem with that. So that's you know, hopefully that's a help from that point of view. And also just on the question about sort of uptake, that we know that you know, as we know, it's a complex time as we go through the transition and the new schemes are being rolled out. So we are looking at lots of different ways to, you know, to try and make people more aware of, you know, what's available through the schemes. And as more standards in the full scheme come out later this year, you know, we'll be doing lots of work and talking to lots of organisations such as, or we sort of already are, but you know, continuing to have those, you know, those conversations as a, you know, with lots of different sort of supporting organisations. And talking to farmers, generally talking to farmers as well, as much as we can in different areas. As I'm sure you do, as our pilot participants talk, you know, in terms of what you're doing and how that's running in the pilot, and how that is sort of, you know, similar or maybe different to the schemes that are coming out. So we are aware of that, and we're doing sort of lots of work around that at the moment.
Thanks, Sam. Sam, we've got a question here about uptake of the main SFI scheme, and I think so. In terms of the main SFI scheme, we wanted a controlled rollout of the sustainable farming incentive during 2022. We wanted to make sure that the online platform worked, was accessible, and was easy for you to use. So at first we did it on invite only basis, where people were invited to apply that said they would like to. So we have had a controlled rollout. We can see that applications are encouraging and are going up for the sustainable farming incentive, but we do know that there's issues, and we've listened to your feedback in terms of what the issues are for the main live scheme. And what we have introduced is a management fee, and this is for the main SFI scheme that will be applied to those with agreements in SFI 22, as well as those that apply to the new SFI 23 scheme. And this recognises the cost for actually you accessing a scheme, the management cost. So there will be that added into your agreement, and that will be available for you. So hopefully that answers your concerns about the rollout of sustainable farming incentive. And we recognise that now that the offer will be, we're adding 6 new standards later this year, so it will be a much more attractive offer for people to add into their agreements. Sam, there's I think we've got time for 2 more questions. There is a question on the PWGs, the practitioner working groups, and what's happening with those.
Thanks, Louise. So yeah, so I think I noticed we've got a comment about those. So I think once the policy teams have done that initial work with the practitioner working groups, and I know that there were lots of that, you know, there was certainly the hedgerow one, and I think there was one over the low known put grassland. Because we've sort of got to this stage where we've sort of put together what we're hoping to launch, or what we're planning to launch for SFI 23, we're in that sort of stage of working through that and putting that into an operational side now. So once that's in place, and we you know, start to review and to look at that, and then to look at the other standards that need to go in to sort of complement that, then we'll look at you know, where we can get people involved in either practitioner groups and feasibility community groups, or where we can take more feedback, you know, as well. So although they're sort of on a sort of hold at the moment, that's not to say that they'll be on hold forever, but we're in that sort of in between stage at the moment where we've done some initial work. Now we've got to get it into the actual policies themselves before we can sort of start doing some more work for new standards or reviewing what we've done at the moment.
Thanks, Sam. So I think we've got two more questions that seem to be coming up time and time again, so we'll be taking those. The first question relates to the new standards that'll be coming on stream for the Sustainable Farming Incentive in 2023, and we've got a number of pilot farmers asking if they can get access to those. So we are working on that, particularly on the standards that aren't available through the pilot. So, for example, the integrated pest management and nutrient management standards, and we are looking at ways that we can offer them to you, as well as the other standards that you can have in the pilot. So as soon as we are looking at that, and as soon as we come to a position, we will be sharing that information to you. You can apply for an SFI 23 agreement, or indeed an SFI 22 agreement on land that you've got outside of the pilot, if you wish to do so, and you have got that land available. So you could have two agreements running on your farm, depending on the land that you've got in the pilot, or indeed if you wanted to place all of your land in the pilot and it wasn't in, you could do that during your annual change period by adding more standards into the pilot and covering more. The final question that I'm going to cover is about administration costs, and there's a number of you asking about the administration costs of running a scheme. And we are trying to minimise the administration costs for running the scheme by having a simple, streamlined application portal, by having the site visit approach that we've taken. We are trying to very much minimise the cost, getting rid of the claim form and going to the annual declaration. All these processes that we've tried to introduce, we are trying to cut down on the administration for you, but also to reduce the administration costs of us delivering a scheme, and we have got targets that they are working towards. So in terms of what it costs, it is minimal. The majority of the payments that we've got go to you as farmers and producers of food, to deliver the environmental benefits that we are seeking to deliver. Sam, anything you wanted to add on that before we close?
No, I think that's fine. I think, you know, like lots of these things, it's quite a complex area, but you know, we're balancing while we've still got the, you know, we've still got part of BPS running, we've still got existing schemes running. We're balancing those as we roll out the new schemes, and as we're working through you know, some of these areas in the pilot to understand the costs and where we have, it's all a case of balancing that between the two.
Thanks, Sam. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. My team have been busily in the background answering some of the questions. So if you haven't heard an answer to the question, please do take the time just to have a look at the answered questions, because they have been trying to answer as many questions as you can. We will be sharing the recording from today's session. So if you would like to listen back, or you haven't had the opportunity to attend, we will be sending that out, and we'll be sending out a link to the report and the slides for you to have a look over. Please do let us know what you think, what you thought of the webinar, and we'd be really interested in you joining the virtual discussions as well for us to discuss in more detail. We've just launched a poll there to say how useful you found the webinar. Please do take the time to let us know what you think of it, because that'll help us inform where we go in the future. If you do have any questions that weren't answered today, please do get in touch with us, and our email address is on screen. So I'll just leave the call open for a couple of minutes for you to input to the poll. Liz, just checking how much time have we got left for the poll?
Yep, just 2 more seconds.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
There we go. That's really great to hear. Thank you. The majority of you found that useful. Well, thank you very much indeed for attending today. We hope you find it useful, and we shall see you all very soon. Hope you have a lovely day. Thanks, everybody.